today's Sherlock Holmes story. You know, each time I sit down to record these stories, I'm reminded that you listening right now are like family to me. Your comments brighten my days more than you could ever know, and I'm grateful from the bottom of my heart for your presence here. Before we begin, I'd love to hear something positive that brightened your day recently, big or small, and where in the world you're watching from. I'll personally select several to highlight in our next video. Your comments are not just comments, they are connections of heart that make this channel what it is. Thank you, and let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Whist Tournament. Chapter 1. A Game Interrupted. It was during the bitter winter of 1894 that my friend Sherlock Holmes became involved in what I must count among his most ingenious cases. The frost had laid siege to London for nearly a fortnight, transforming the city's familiar landscape into a glittering wasteland of ice and snow. The Thames had partially frozen in places, and the daily papers spoke of nothing but the extraordinary severity of the season. I had been spending more time than usual at Baker Street, as the treacherous conditions had considerably reduced my medical practice, with patients either unable to reach my consulting rooms or reluctant to venture out for all but the most serious complaints. The particular evening in question remains etched in my memory with unusual clarity. Outside, a dense fog had descended upon the city, muffling the sounds of hansoms and wrapping the gas lamps in ghostly halos. Within our comfortable sitting room at 221B, a cheerful fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the Persian carpet and the chemical-stained table that served as Holmes's laboratory bench. The tangy odour of one of his recent experiments still lingered in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of Mrs. Hudson's excellent roast beef, which we had enjoyed some hours earlier. Holmes sat in his favourite armchair, his lean figure draped in the mouse-coloured dressing gown he favoured during his periods of contemplation. His pipe had gone out, though he seemed not to have noticed, and his long, sensitive fingers were steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic attitude I had come to associate with his deeper ruminations. The evening papers lay scattered about him, and from time to time he would reach for one, scan a particular column with his keen grey eyes, and then cast it aside with a slight sniff of dissatisfaction. I had settled myself with a volume of surgical techniques recently published by an Edinburgh colleague, but found my attention wandering as the warmth of the room and the lateness of the hour conspired to induce drowsiness. I had just begun to doze when a sharp exclamation from my companion startled me back to full alertness. "Well, well, what do you make of this, Watson?" He thrust the Standard toward me, one slender finger indicating a small article nestled between advertisements for liver pills and ladies' corsets. "Tragedy at the Whitmore Club," I read aloud, adjusting my spectacles. "Distinguished gentleman suffers fatal seizure during whist finals." "Pray continue," Holmes urged, his eyes glinting with sudden interest. He leaned forward, the firelight accentuating the hawk-like features of his countenance. "Mr. Sebastian Moran, aged 62, respected member of London's most exclusive card-playing society, collapsed yesterday evening during the final round of the annual Whitmore Whist Tournament," I read. Despite the immediate attention of two physicians present among the membership, Mr. Moran was pronounced dead at the scene. The club has suspended all activities pending further investigation. "Observe the curious detail they neglect to mention, Watson," said Holmes, now on his feet and pacing the room with quick, nervous steps. I reread the article carefully. "I'm afraid I don't follow. It seems a straightforward, if unfortunate, case of natural death." "The timing, my dear fellow. The exact moment of his collapse. In a tournament setting, such details would be meticulously recorded, each hand played, each point scored, the precise progression of the game. Yet here we find this rather pointed omission. Holmes paused before the window, drawing aside the heavy curtain to peer into the fog-shrouded street below. A card tournament, particularly one at an establishment as prestigious as the Whitmore, operates with the precision of a Swiss chronometer. Every detail is noted. Why then no mention of the exact circumstances under which Mr. Moran expired? Perhaps the newspapers simply deemed it unimportant, I suggested, though I knew from long experience that Holmes rarely seized upon details without good reason. Perhaps, he conceded, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. His long fingers tapped a restless tattoo against the window pane. The Whitmore Club, one of the most exclusive establishments in London, membership restricted to gentlemen of the highest social standing and those with particular talents at the card table. Their annual whist tournament is quite the event in certain circles. You seem remarkably well informed about an institution dedicated to a pursuit you have never shown any interest in, I remarked with some surprise. Holmes smiled thinly. The science of deduction applies to all fields of human endeavour, Watson. Card play, with its mathematical certainties and psychological elements, has always held a theoretical interest for me, even if I have never sought to master the games themselves. I once wrote a small monograph on the statistical probabilities inherent in whist, a trifling exercise, but it proved useful in a case involving a card-cheating scandal in Hampshire some years ago. He returned to his chair and reached for his tobacco pouch, stuffing the bowl of his pipe with the strong shag that he preferred. "I should not be surprised," he continued, striking a match, "if we receive a visitor within the next—" He was interrupted by the sudden jangling of our bell, followed by hurried footsteps on the 17 stairs leading to our sitting room. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson appeared at the door, her expression one of mild apology at the lateness of the caller. "Inspector Lestrade to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, stepping aside to allow our visitor entry. "Ah!" Holmes resumed his seat, a satisfied smile playing about his lips as he gestured toward the chair opposite his own. "Do come in, Inspector. I take it you wish to discuss the unfortunate events at the Whitmore Club?" Lestrade paused in the doorway, his ferret-like features registering surprise. He was bundled in a thick overcoat, and melting snow glistened on his hat and shoulders. "How in heaven's name did you know that, Mr. Holmes?" he demanded, advancing into the room and removing his sodden outer garments. "The matter hasn't even been made public as suspicious. I've only just come from there myself." Come, Lestrade. The Standard reports a death at the Whitmore Club, and here you are at this unseemly hour. Either you have developed a sudden passion for whist, or there is more to Mr. Sebastian Moran's demise than meets the eye. Since I have never known you to be a card enthusiast, the latter seemed the more probable explanation. The inspector shook his head in that familiar gesture of bewilderment that Holmes's deductions so often produced in him. "Well, you're right as usual," he admitted, accepting the chair Holmes had indicated, "though I'm blessed if I understand how you've divined it. Yes, there's something deuced odd about this business at the Whitmore, and I'd value your opinion." As Lestrade settled himself before the fire, I observed the signs of strain in his face and the spatters of mud on his trouser cuffs, evidence of hurried movement through London's slushy streets. Whatever had brought him to Baker Street at this late hour was clearly a matter of some urgency, and I sensed that Holmes's peculiar talents were about to be called upon once more. "Pray tell us the details, Inspector," said Holmes, his eyes alight with that singular gleam that presaged his immersion in a new problem. "Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem." Chapter 2. The Inspector's Request. Inspector Lestrade settled himself before our fire, the melting snow from his coat forming a small puddle upon Mrs. Hudson's carpet. His ferret-like features bore an expression of unusual discomfort as he accepted the glass of brandy Holmes offered him. The weather had clearly taken its toll on the Scotland Yard man. His face was pinched with cold, and his usual brisk manner seemed dampened by the gravity of whatever matter had brought him to our door at such an hour. "It's an awkward business, Mr. Holmes," he began, after taking a fortifying sip of the spirits. He reached into his breast pocket and produced his well-worn notebook, thumbing through several pages until he found his place. The notebook itself was damp at the edges, testament to the inclemency of the night through which he had travelled to reach us. "The deceased, Mr. Sebastian Moran, was no ordinary gentleman," Lestrade continued, glancing up from his notes. "He served as private secretary to Lord Blackwood, and there are political considerations." I observed a flicker of increased interest in Holmes's expression at the mention of political entanglements. My friend had little patience for the machinations of government, yet ironically found himself drawn into such matters with surprising frequency, often at the behest of his brother Mycroft. "Pray confine yourself to the facts, Inspector," Holmes said, lighting his pipe with methodical precision. The sweet aroma of his shag tobacco soon mingled with the scent of damp wool from Lestrade's clothing. "I find that political considerations frequently obscure rather than illuminate the essential elements of a case." "Very well." Lestrade cleared his throat and consulted his notes once more. "Moran collapsed at precisely 9:47 last evening, during the final round of the tournament. The club secretary was most particular about the time. Apparently, they keep meticulous records of each hand played. As one would expect at an establishment of the Whitmore's calibre," Holmes interjected, his eyes half closed as he drew on his pipe. Indeed, he had just completed dealing the cards for what would have been the last hand of the evening. According to witnesses, he adjusted his chair, something they say he did habitually, then reached for his snuff-box. Before he could open it, he gasped, clutched his chest, and fell forward onto the card table. Death appears to have been instantaneous. "Were there any signs of distress prior to the collapse?" I inquired, my medical instincts naturally drawing me to questions of symptomatology. "None reported," Lestrade replied. "By all accounts, he was in fine spirits throughout the evening, having played, as they say, a remarkable game." "The other players?" Holmes inquired, his tone deceptively casual. I knew from experience that he was mentally cataloguing each detail for later consideration. His partner was Colonel James Havisham, retired from the Bengal Lancers, a distinguished military man with an impeccable reputation. The opponents were Sir George Blackett, a baronet with extensive holdings in Kent, and Dr. Julian Forsyth, who maintains a practice in Harley Street. All are long-standing members of the club, and none had any apparent quarrel with the deceased. Holmes nodded slowly, the smoke from his pipe creating a blue haze about his head. The firelight cast long shadows across his aquiline features, accentuating the intensity of his gaze. "And the preliminary medical examination?" "Natural causes, according to Dr. Forsyth, who attended him. Heart failure." The doctor noted nothing unusual about the presentation, and given the gentleman's age and the lack of any suspicious circumstances, there seemed little reason to question the diagnosis. "Yet here you are, Inspector," Holmes observed, raising an eyebrow. "Something has clearly aroused your suspicions, or you would not be trudging through the snow to Baker Street at this hour." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It's the club secretary, Mr. Thaddeus Wilson, a most meticulous individual, maintains all the club records, oversees the staff, that sort of thing. He insists something was amiss." "In what way, precisely?" "That's just it. He can't precisely say, but he is adamant that Mr. Moran was in perfect health, never missed his daily constitutional regardless of weather, Moreover, he claims Moran had been unusually agitated in recent weeks, checking his mail repeatedly, starting at shadows. Interesting, murmured Holmes. Paranoia can be a symptom of certain medical conditions, of course. Or of a guilty conscience, I suggested. Or, Holmes added, of a well-founded fear. Pray continue, Inspector. Wilson mentioned that Moran was particularly concerned about some personal correspondence. And there's something else. Lestrade hesitated, flipping forward several pages in his notebook. The club employs a young page boy, Tommy Wilkins, who claims he saw Moran arguing with a foreign-looking gentleman outside the club 3 days ago. The boy says Moran seemed frightened afterward, though he didn't report this until after the death. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar light I had come to associate with his detection of significant clues. Tell me, Inspector, was anything found in Mr. Moran's snuff box? I presume it was among his effects at the time of death. Lestrade looked surprised at the question. Nothing unusual, though now you mention it, it was peculiar that it was empty. Wilson says Moran was fastidious about keeping it filled, had a special mixture blended for him by a tobacconist in Jermyn Street. Most illuminating, Holmes murmured. And the box itself. Might I examine it? It's at Scotland Yard, along with the rest of his personal effects. I could have it sent round tomorrow. That would be most helpful. Was there anything else of note among his belongings? Papers, letters, unusual items? Nothing out of the ordinary. A pocket watch, wallet with a few pounds, club membership card, a handkerchief, and a small notebook containing what appeared to be whist notations. I should like to see that notebook as well, Holmes said. One final question, Inspector. This Lord Blackwood, for whom Moran worked, has he been informed of the death? Yes, a constable was dispatched to his residence immediately. His lordship expressed shock and appropriate regret, but made no particular comment beyond requesting that the body be handled with due respect. And the nature of his lordship's political work? Foreign Office connections, I believe, though the details are beyond my purview. Lestrade closed his notebook with a snap. Will you look into the matter, Mr. Holmes? The Commissioner is anxious to have it resolved quickly and discreetly. The involvement of someone in Lord Blackwood's employ makes it a delicate situation. Holmes rose and moved to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtain to gaze out into the fog-shrouded street. For a long moment he stood in silence, the ember of his pipe glowing in the darkness of his silhouette. "We shall attend the club tomorrow morning, Watson, if you're free," he said at length, turning back toward us. I nodded my assent, already anticipating the investigation to come. Although the hour was late and the weather forbidding, I felt that familiar quickening of the pulse that accompanied the commencement of one of Holmes's cases. "Excellent," said Holmes, returning to his chair. "Inspector, please arrange for us to have access to the club premises and ensure that the room where the tragedy occurred remains undisturbed. Also, I should like to interview this secretary, Wilson, and the page boy." "I'll see to it," Lestrade promised, rising from his chair. He appeared visibly relieved at Holmes's acceptance of the case. "First thing tomorrow, then?" "Indeed. The sooner we examine the scene, the better." The inspector took his leave shortly thereafter, vanishing into the swirling fog that enveloped Baker Street. I moved to close the curtains against the dismal night, but Holmes motioned for me to leave them open. He had sunk into his chair, knees drawn up to his chin, the blue smoke from his pipe wreathing his thoughtful countenance. I recognized the signs all too well. Sherlock Holmes was already deep in contemplation of our new case. Experience had taught me that he might remain thus for hours, piecing together the fragments of information Lestrade had provided, testing theories, and forming preliminary conclusions. I knew better than to disturb him with questions or observations that could wait until morning. As I retired to my room some time later, the murmur of the dying fire and Holmes's occasional movement were the only sounds breaking the stillness of our lodgings. Through the partly open door, I could see his lean silhouette, still motionless in his chair, illuminated by the last flickering flames. Whatever secrets surrounded the death of Sebastian Moran, I had no doubt that my friend's remarkable intellect was already beginning to unravel them, thread by subtle thread. The prospect of our visit to the Whitmore Club the following morning filled me with that peculiar combination of anticipation and apprehension that had become so familiar during my years as Holmes's chronicler and companion. Little did I suspect then the extraordinary chain of deductions and revelations that awaited us, or the ingenious method by which death had been dealt at the whist table. Chapter 3. The Whitmore Club. Morning brought little relief from the severe weather that had gripped London. The snow had ceased, but a penetrating cold remained, turning the previous night's precipitation to treacherous ice upon the pavements. From our sitting-room window, I observed a gentleman of advanced years take a nasty fall directly opposite our lodgings, requiring the assistance of two passers-by to regain his footing. Holmes, who had apparently not retired to bed at all, watched the scene with detached interest before returning to the chemical experiment that had occupied him since dawn. "I trust you slept well, Watson," he remarked, without looking up from his test tubes. "You shall need your wits about you today. The Whitmore case presents certain unusual features." "You have formed a theory already?" I inquired, helping myself to the coffee Mrs. Hudson had brought up. "Several, but it would be premature to favour any particular one. We must first examine the scene and interview the witnesses." He set aside his apparatus and consulted his pocket watch. "We should depart within the half-hour if we are to meet Lestrade at our appointed time." A short while later found us ensconced in a hansom cab, making our way through the frigid streets towards St. James's. Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence throughout the journey, his keen eyes taking in the passing scenes of London life with that peculiar detached attention I knew so well. Only once did he speak, to point out a man selling flowers on a street corner. "Observe, Watson, how that fellow's right sleeve is pinned up. Clearly he lost an arm in military service, yet note how deftly he manipulates those blooms with his remaining hand. Remarkable how the human body adapts to circumstance, is it not?" Before I could respond, Holmes had lapsed back into silence. I knew better than to disturb his ruminations, for his mind was already engaged with the problem that lay before us. The Whitmore Club occupied a handsome Georgian building, set back slightly from the street, its red brick facade and white stone quoins speaking of dignified tradition rather than ostentatious display. Two stone lions flanked the entrance steps, their features softened by age and London's perpetual grime. The brass plaque beside the heavy oak door bore no name, merely the letter W in flowing script, the only external indication of the exclusive establishment's identity. Lestrade awaited us on the top step, stamping his feet against the cold. He nodded in greeting and rapped sharply on the door, which was promptly opened by a livid footman whose impassive countenance suggested years of practised discretion. "Inspector Lestrade and Associates, to see Mr. Wilson," the Scotland Yard man announced, presenting his card. We were admitted to a marble-floored entrance hall of impressive proportions. A grand staircase curved upward to our right, while several doors led off to what I presumed were various club rooms. The atmosphere was one of hushed luxury. Thick carpets muffled our footsteps, oil paintings in heavy gilt frames adorned the walls, and a subtle aroma of beeswax polish and good tobacco pervaded the air. The club secretary, Mr. Wilson, met us at the foot of the staircase, a thin, precise man of perhaps 50 years, whose gold-rimmed spectacles could not quite hide the shadows beneath his eyes. His clothing was sombre, and impeccably maintained, his collar starched to rigid perfection. He made a slight bow at our introduction. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Inspector. The Whitmore Club is at your disposal. I have informed our chairman of your visit, of course. He asks only that we maintain the utmost discretion in this unfortunate matter." "Naturally," Holmes replied. "I should like to see the room where Mr. Moran collapsed. Of course, this way, gentlemen." Wilson led us up the staircase, explaining as we ascended. "Nothing has been disturbed in the card room, Mr. Holmes, as per the inspector's instructions, though of course the regular morning cleaning had been done before the incident." "I understand Mr. Moran was a long-standing member?" Holmes inquired, his eyes scanning the portraits of distinguished gentlemen that lined the stairwell. 23 years, Wilson confirmed. "One of our most respected members. His skill at whist was quite legendary in club circles." The card room proved to be a handsome apartment on the first floor, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork and its walls panelled in dark mahogany. 6 green baize-covered tables were arranged with mathematical precision across a turkey carpet of subdued pattern. Brass reading lamps with green shades stood upon each table, and comfortable leather chairs awaited the players. The room faced east, and the morning sun, weak though it was, cast oblique shadows through the tall windows. Mr. Moran always sat here, facing the window. Wilson indicated a chair at the table nearest the fireplace. He was most particular about his position, would not play otherwise. Holmes moved to the indicated chair, his keen eyes scanning the table and its surroundings with that intense focus I had observed countless times. He ran his fingers along the baize, examined the chair legs, and peered closely at the candlesticks that stood upon the mantelpiece. "Was this fire lit during play?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Mr. Moran preferred a warm room, insisted upon it, in fact, said the cold affected his concentration." Holmes nodded, continuing his careful examination. He dropped to his knees to inspect the underside of the table, then rose fluidly to study the window latches. I noted how Wilson watched his every movement with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Mr. Moran had certain habits during play, I understand?" Holmes inquired, his tone conversational even as his eyes continued their meticulous inspection. "Oh, yes," Wilson replied eagerly, seemingly relieved by the mundane nature of the question. "Most systematic gentleman. Always adjusted his chair after the 4th hand, said it helped his concentration, had a precise way of shuffling too, 27 times exactly. I've seen him count under his breath. And the snuff, of course, he would take it only after winning a rubber, or if his partner made a particularly clever play." "Interesting. And these cards, they are from last night's game?" Holmes lifted a deck from one of the other tables, riffling them expertly between his long fingers. "No, sir. Those were removed with the body." Wilson's voice faltered slightly. "These are fresh from our regular supplier. We change them daily, you see." "Naturally." Holmes replaced the cards and moved to examine the chair upholstery more closely, producing his lens to study what appeared to be a minute stain on the armrest. "Tell me, had Mr. Moran received any unusual correspondence lately?" The question, delivered so casually, seemed to catch Wilson off guard. He blinked rapidly, an unconscious adjustment of his spectacles betraying a momentary discomfiture. "Why, yes, now that you mention it. A letter arrived for him about 3 weeks ago, foreign posting, I believe, Switzerland from the stamps. He turned quite pale upon reading it." "Did he share the contents with anyone?" "Not to my knowledge, but he was visibly disturbed, asked me personally if any inquiries had been made about him at the club." "And had there been?" "No, sir, nothing of the sort." Holmes straightened, pocketing his lens. "I should like to speak with the page boy, Tommy Wilkins, I believe his name is." The one who observed Mr. Moran in conversation with a foreign gentleman. Of course. He's on duty in the reception hall. I'll have him sent up directly. As Wilson departed to summon the boy, Holmes moved to the window, gazing down at the street below. The winter sun illuminated his aquiline profile, throwing his features into sharp relief. I knew from long experience that his mind was working rapidly, assembling the fragments of information into a coherent pattern. "What do you make of it all, Holmes?" I ventured. "It is a singular case, Watson. Consider, a man of precise habits dies in the midst of his favourite pastime. His snuff-box is empty, though he was meticulous about keeping it filled. He had received a disturbing letter from Switzerland. He was observed arguing with a foreigner, and he served as private secretary to a gentleman with political connections." Holmes tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the window frame. "The individual facts may seem unremarkable, but taken together they suggest a narrative of considerable interest." The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor signalled Wilson's return with the page boy. Before they entered, Holmes turned to me, his expression grave. "There is a shadow over this club, Watson. Behind the polished brass and green baize lurks something quite sinister. I suspect our friend Mr. Moran's habits at the card table may prove to be the key to this entire affair." The page boy who entered was a freckle-faced youth of perhaps 14, attired in the smart livery of the club. He twisted his cap nervously in his hands, clearly intimidated by the prospect of being questioned. Little did I know then how his simple observations would provide the first crucial link in the chain of evidence that would ultimately reveal the ingenious method by which Sebastian Moran had met his end at the whist table. Chapter 4. A Matter of Routine. Our interview with the page boy Tommy Wilkins proved illuminating, though perhaps not in the manner the lad himself might have anticipated. Holmes questioned him with that peculiar mixture of gentleness and precision which I had often observed him employ with younger witnesses. The boy, initially overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, soon relaxed under my friend's skilful handling. "Now then, Tommy," said Holmes after establishing a rapport through questions about the boy's duties at the club, "tell me exactly what you saw 3 days ago regarding Mr. Moran and his foreign visitor." "It was Tuesday afternoon, sir, just after 4 o'clock. I remember because I'd been sent to post some letters for Mr. Wilson." The boy's face screwed up in concentration. "Mr. Moran had just arrived for his afternoon tea. He always took it in the small reading room, punctual as clockwork, sir." "Go on," Holmes encouraged as the boy hesitated. "Well, sir, as he was about to enter, this gentleman approached him on the steps. Foreign-looking he was, very precise in his movements, with a pointed beard and spectacles. Spoke perfect English, though, but with an accent. Swiss-like, I'd say, though I haven't heard many." "You overheard their conversation?" "Bits of it, sir. The foreign gentleman said something about time running out and arrangements must be made." "Mr. Moran looked proper upset, sir." "His face went all pale, and he kept glancing around like he thought someone might be watching. Then he said, 'Not here,' and they both walked off toward Green Park." "And when they returned?" "That's just it, sir. Mr. Moran came back alone about an hour later, went straight to the reading room, but didn't touch his tea, just sat staring at the newspaper, though I don't think he was really reading it." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "And you mentioned this to no one until after Mr. Moran's death?" "No, sir." The boy's freckled face flushed with embarrassment. "Didn't seem my place to gossip about the gentleman, but when I heard what happened, well, it seemed important-like." After dismissing the page boy with a half-crown that brought a look of astonished gratitude to his young face, Holmes spent another quarter-hour examining the card-room. His inspection complete, we took our leave of the Whitmore Club with the understanding that we would return the following day to interview the other players who had been present during the fatal game. "We have one more call to make today, Watson," Holmes announced as we emerged onto the street. "Colonel Havisham should be at his club at this hour, and I am most eager to speak with him." A hansom deposited us shortly thereafter at the imposing entrance of the Army and Navy Club in Pall Mall. The porter, upon hearing Holmes's name, directed us immediately to the smoking room, where we found Colonel Havisham ensconced in a leather armchair by the window, a copy of the Times folded neatly beside him. The colonel was a florid man with a magnificent white moustache and the rigid posture of one who has spent a lifetime in military service. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct, though I detected a shadow of distress behind his disciplined exterior. "Mr. Holmes," he acknowledged, gesturing to the adjacent chairs. "I've been expecting you. Dreadful business about poor Moran. I've scarcely slept since it happened." "You were his regular partner at whist, I understand?" Holmes inquired, declining the offered cigar with a shake of his head. 3 years running." The colonel's voice carried the precise, measured tones of a man accustomed to command. "Knew every detail of his play, that business with the chair, for instance, always after the fourth hand, precise as clockwork. Said it was lucky, bit superstitious about his snuff, too. Wouldn't touch it unless we'd won a rubber. An excellent player, by all accounts. The finest whist player in London," Havisham declared without hesitation, warming his hands before the fire that crackled in the grate. "Had a system, you know. Absolutely unbeatable when it came to calculating the odds. Photographic memory for every card played. Could tell you the exact probability of any given combination turning up." "You must have observed him closely during your partnership?" "Naturally. In whist, one must develop an understanding of one's partner's methods. Moran was methodical. Everything by the numbers. His shuffle, for example, always 27 times, never more, never less. Said it produced the optimal distribution of the cards." "Did you observe anything unusual in his behavior recently?" Holmes inquired. His tone casual, though his eyes remained keenly focused on the colonel's face. The colonel's ruddy complexion darkened further. "Come to think of it, he seemed distracted these past few weeks, missing subtle signals, forgetting our established conventions. Most unlike him. I asked him about it once. After a particularly egregious misplay, he brushed it off, claimed he was troubled by rheumatism, but I've known too many men hiding their true concerns behind physical complaints to be fooled." "And on the night in question, how did he appear then?" "Played brilliantly right up until, well," the colonel's voice faltered momentarily. "We were ahead by 2 rubbers. The evening had gone exceptionally well. Moran seemed almost his old self. He'd just dealt the final hand. Beautiful shuffle, his usual 27 times. I counted out of habit, you understand?" "Yes." Holmes leaned forward slightly, his interest visibly piqued. "Damnedest thing." He adjusted his chair, though it wasn't the fourth hand now that I think on it, reached for his snuff-box and, well, you know the rest. The colonel's military composure cracked slightly as he recalled the scene. Never seen anything like it. One moment engaged in friendly competition, the next gone. "You say he adjusted his chair, though it wasn't the fourth hand," Holmes repeated. "Was that unusual?" "Highly. As I said, Moran was a creature of precise habits. That chair adjustment was as regular as a military drill, always after the fourth hand, never otherwise." Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Most instructive. Tell me, Colonel, did Mr. Moran ever speak of his time in India?" The abrupt change of subject seemed to startle Havisham. "India? No, can't say that he did. Though he did mention once about serving in Afghanistan. Same campaign as you, Dr. Watson, I believe." I started in surprise. I don't recall ever encountering him. "Different regiment, perhaps," the colonel suggested. "Grenadier Guards," he said, "though now you mention it, I always thought it odd he never spoke of it in detail. Most unusual for a military man. We tend to bore civilians rigid with our campaign reminiscences, as my dear wife would attest." A brief smile crossed his features before fading into solemnity once more. "Indeed," Holmes agreed. "And these other players, Sir George Blackett and Dr. Forsyth, what can you tell me of them?" "Blackett's an old India hand, tea plantations mainly, made a fortune before retiring to his estate in Kent. Decent player, though inclined to take unnecessary risks. Forsyth's a Harley Street physician, neurology, I believe. Steady, methodical player. They're both long-standing members, though neither was particularly close to Moran outside the card room." "One final question, if I may," Holmes said, rising from his chair. "This system of Moran's, did he ever document it? Notes, perhaps, or a manuscript?" The Colonel looked thoughtful. He kept a small notebook in his waistcoat pocket, made entries after each game, figures, calculations, that sort of thing. "Said he was compiling a mathematical treatise on whist probabilities." "The notebook was mentioned among his effects," I remarked, recalling Lestrade's inventory. "I should very much like to examine it," Holmes said. "Colonel, you have been most helpful. Should any other details occur to you, however slight, pray telegraph me immediately." As we departed the club, the winter afternoon was already fading into twilight, the gas lamps being lit along Pall Mall. Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence as we walked, his collar turned up against the biting wind, his hands thrust deep into the pockets of his ulster. "A most interesting conversation, would you not agree, Watson?" he remarked at length. "The matter of the chair adjustment seems significant," I ventured. "Precisely. A man of rigid habits suddenly breaks pattern in his final moments, and this mention of Afghanistan most curious. I think, Watson, that it is time we learned more about the man who called himself Sebastian Moran. There is a telegram I must send. Then I believe a visit to the Foreign Office may be in order." I followed Holmes through the gathering darkness, the gas lamps casting our elongated shadows before us as we made our way toward Trafalgar Square. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to assemble themselves, though the complete picture remained tantalizingly obscure. What connection could possibly exist between a whist player's habitual mannerisms, a mysterious foreigner, and Holmes's sudden interest in military service records? As always, I marveled at my friend's ability to detect significance in details that others, myself included, would dismiss as trivial. Chapter 5. The Old Campaign. The winter evening had fully descended by the time we returned to Baker Street. The lamps cast pools of yellow light upon the pavement, and our breath hung in the air as crystalline vapour. Holmes dispatched a telegram from the office at the corner, though he did not share its contents with me. His features had settled into that mask of concentrated thought which I knew presaged a significant development in his reasoning. "Watson," Holmes remarked, as we entered our sitting room, shaking the cold from our garments, "I should be most grateful if you would consult your old army records. Any mention of a Sebastian Moran serving in Afghanistan would be of particular interest." "You doubt the Colonel's recollection?" I asked, moving to warm my hands before the fire that Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully maintained in our absence. "Not his recollection, but perhaps the accuracy of what he was told," Holmes replied, cryptically, settling into his armchair and reaching for his pipe. It is a curious feature of this case that our victim seems to have been a man of both rigid habits and elusive background. I spent the next hour searching through my military documents, carefully reviewing the names of officers and men with whom I had served during that terrible campaign. The task stirred memories I had long attempted to suppress: the blistering heat, the sudden brutal skirmishes, the constant threat of snipers, and the grim struggle in the field hospitals where I had practiced my medical skills under the most challenging conditions imaginable. "Nothing," I announced finally, closing the last of my journals with a decisive thump. "No Sebastian Moran in any of the regiments I encountered, though of course my records are far from comprehensive." "I thought as much," Holmes nodded, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Now, pray excuse me, I have a telegram to send." He returned from his second expedition to the telegraph office an hour later, his cheeks flushed with the cold. His eyes, however, gleamed with that peculiar light that indicated his mental faculties were fully engaged. "We shall have visitors tomorrow, Watson," he announced, with barely contained excitement. "Most illuminating ones, I expect." "You've made progress, then?" I inquired, pouring him a glass of brandy to ward off the chill. "Let us say that certain suspicions have been confirmed," he replied guardedly. "The matter requires delicate handling. There are aspects of this case, my dear fellow, that extend well beyond a simple death at a card table." True to his word, the following morning brought two callers to Baker Street. The first arrived promptly at 10:30, a distinguished-looking gentleman of perhaps 60 years, with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of a government official. He introduced himself as James Morton, formerly of the Foreign Office. "I understand you're inquiring about Sebastian Moran," he began without preamble, declining Holmes's offer of refreshment with a curt shake of his head. His tone was formal, carrying the faint but unmistakable warning of official censure. "I am investigating his death, yes," Holmes replied mildly, settling into his chair across from our visitor. "I should tell you, Mr. Holmes, that certain matters pertaining to his service are classified," Morton stated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I am interested only in establishing whether he served in Afghanistan," Holmes responded with deliberate casualness, though I detected the keen attention behind his relaxed demeanor. Morton's expression grew grave, the lines around his mouth deepening. "I can tell you with absolute certainty that no person by that name served in any capacity during that campaign." "As I thought," Holmes nodded, his fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. "And the name John Prescott, does that perhaps strike a chord?" The effect of this question upon our visitor was remarkable. Morton's face turned pale, and he gripped the arms of his chair with sudden intensity. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper, "I must ask how you came by that name." "Simple deduction, Mr. Morton," Holmes replied with calculated nonchalance. "The habits of the man who called himself Moran were most revealing, not those of a soldier, but rather of a clerk accustomed to precision and routine. His knowledge of Switzerland, the recent correspondence from that country, the mathematical approach to his card-playing, all suggested a man of clerical background with foreign connections." Morton glanced toward the door, as if ensuring we were indeed private. "This is a matter of national security, Mr. Holmes. I am not at liberty to discuss it." "Pray don't concern yourself. All will become clear shortly," Holmes assured him with a dismissive wave. "Ah, unless I am mistaken, here comes our second visitor." Indeed, Mrs. Hudson's knock upon the door heralded the arrival of another caller. The new arrival proved to be a small, nervous man clutching a leather portfolio to his chest as though it contained state secrets. His waistcoat was spotted with ink, and his collar bore the slightly frayed appearance of one who spends long hours at a desk with little concern for his appearance. "Mr. Peters, I presume," Holmes greeted him, rising to shake the man's hand. "Do come in. This is Dr. Watson, my colleague, and Mr. Morton of the Foreign Office." Peters cast an alarmed glance at Morton, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I have the information you requested, Mr. Holmes," Peters announced with visible discomfort, producing a document from his portfolio. "Most irregular, but given the circumstances." His voice trailed off as he handed the paper to Holmes. "What is the meaning of this?" Morton demanded, his composure slipping momentarily. "Mr. Peters is a clerk from Cox's banking house," Holmes explained calmly. "I took the liberty of requesting certain financial information regarding our late card player." Holmes studied the document with careful attention, his eyes moving rapidly over the figures it contained. "Most revealing," he murmured. "The account in question received regular payments from a source in Switzerland beginning 3 years ago. The last transfer was made 3 weeks ago, a significantly larger sum than usual. The timing of which corresponds precisely with the arrival of a certain letter at the Whitmore Club," Holmes observed, looking up at Morton with quiet triumph. "Thank you, gentlemen. You have been most helpful." Peters departed shortly thereafter, visibly relieved to be released from this unusual interview. Morton, however, lingered, his expression troubled. "This matter goes beyond a simple death investigation, Mr. Holmes," he said with quiet intensity. "There are diplomatic considerations. The reputation of the service is at stake." "Rest assured, Mr. Morton," Holmes replied soberly. "I am well aware of the delicate nature of the situation. My concern is with justice, not scandal." After our second visitor had taken his leave, his reluctant steps betraying his continued anxiety, I turned to Holmes in bewilderment. "I confess I cannot see how these matters connect to a death by natural causes at a whist table," I admitted, filling my pipe as I attempted to arrange the disparate facts into some coherent pattern. "Natural causes, Watson?" Holmes challenged, his eyebrows rising in that characteristic expression of gentle reproach. "Consider, a man with elaborate rituals surrounding his card play suddenly breaks his own patterns, a supposedly empty snuff box, a mysterious letter that causes him visible distress, and now we learn that the man who called himself Sebastian Morin was not who he claimed to be." Holmes rose and moved to the window, drawing aside the curtain to gaze thoughtfully at the street below. The winter sunlight illuminated his aquiline profile as he stood in contemplation. "The game, my dear Watson, is approaching its final hand," he said softly, his voice carrying that peculiar note of satisfaction that always accompanied his resolution of a complex problem. "We must return to the Whitmore Club. There are certain experiments I wish to conduct with a deck of cards." I watched my friend as he continued his vigil at the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the pale winter light. What connection could possibly exist between a banking transaction from Switzerland, a man living under a false identity, and a seemingly natural death at a card table? Yet I had learned through years of association with Sherlock Holmes that when these disparate threads were woven together by his remarkable intellect, they would inevitably form a pattern of perfect logic and startling clarity. "Be so good as to bring your medical bag, Watson," Holmes added, turning from the window with sudden animation. "We may have need of it before the day is out." With this cryptic remark, he retreated to his bedroom, presumably to prepare for our return to the Whitmore Club. I sat in contemplation, attempting to follow the trail of his reasoning, yet finding myself, as so often before, unable to make the intuitive leaps that seemed so natural to his uniquely constituted mind. Chapter 6. The Letter from Abroad. Our return to the Whitmore Club that afternoon was conducted in relative silence, Holmes being absorbed in his thoughts while I contemplated the curious information we had gathered. The weather had moderated slightly, though the streets remained treacherously slick with half-melted ice. As our hansom rattled over the cobblestones, I observed my companion remove a small vial from his waistcoat pocket and study it with intense concentration before returning it to its place. "May I inquire as to the contents of that vial?" I asked, my curiosity finally overcoming my reluctance to disturb his meditation. "A simple chemical reagent, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes focused on the passing scene, one that may prove most illuminating when applied to certain surfaces. The Whitmore Club received us with the same discreet efficiency as before. Wilson, appearing more haggard than during our previous visit, led us directly to the card room. To my surprise, Inspector Lestrade awaited us there, pacing before the fireplace with evident impatience. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade greeted us with obvious relief. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned the investigation altogether." "On the contrary, Inspector," Holmes responded with a thin smile. "I have been pursuing certain inquiries essential to our understanding of the case. I trust you've brought the items I requested." Lestrade produced a small paper-wrapped parcel from his coat pocket. "Moran's personal effects, as requested, the snuff-box and the notebook, though I must say I don't see what bearing they could have on a natural death." "Let us reserve judgment on the nature of Moran's demise," Holmes suggested mildly, accepting the parcel. His fingers moved with delicate precision as he unwrapped it, revealing a silver snuff-box of elegant design and a small leather-bound notebook. Holmes examined the snuff-box first, turning it over in his hands and studying the engraved initials on its lid, S.M. With careful movements, he opened it, confirming its emptiness, then produced his lens to examine the interior with minute attention. "Observe, Watson," he said, handing me the box and his lens. "The traces of powder adhering to the inner rim." I peered through the magnifying glass at the indicated area. "There appears to be a fine residue, yes." "And would you, as a medical man, venture an opinion as to its nature?" I studied the traces more carefully. "It's difficult to say with certainty, but the coloration suggests it is not common snuff. It has a faintly crystalline quality." "Precisely," Holmes agreed with satisfaction. "Now, let us examine this notebook." The small volume was filled with what appeared to be mathematical notations, columns of figures, calculations, and cryptic annotations in a neat, precise hand. Holmes leafed through it with growing interest, pausing occasionally to study particular entries. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "These are not merely records of card games, but cipher calculations. Note the recurring sequences and mathematical progressions." "Cipher?" Lestrade asked with sudden attention. "You mean codes?" "Indeed, Inspector," Holmes confirmed. "Our Mr. Moran, or should I say Prescott, was not merely playing cards for pleasure. He was using the structure of whist games to encode and decode information." The club secretary, who had been hovering nearby, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Holmes, I've just remembered something that may be relevant. The morning after receiving that letter from Switzerland, Mr. Moran requested access to our card inventory." "Did he, indeed?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "And was this request granted?" "Yes, sir. He claimed he was researching variations in card design for an article he was writing. Spent nearly an hour in our storage room. I thought nothing of it at the time." "Of course," Holmes murmured, his expression now animated with the excitement of discovery. "Watson, would you be so good as to inspect those card cabinets?" He indicated a set of drawers built into the far wall of the room. As I moved to comply, the door opened to admit a small, nervous man clutching a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as Peters, the clerk from Cox's banking house, whom we had met earlier at Baker Street. "Mr. Holmes," he said, breathlessly, "I found the additional information you requested. It wasn't easy. The records had been deliberately obscured, but I managed to trace the source of those Swiss deposits." "Excellent, Peters," Holmes said warmly. "Pray continue." "The funds originated from a numbered account in Bern," Peters explained, opening his portfolio to reveal several documents. "But that account, in turn, received regular payments from a Russian diplomatic source." "Russian?" Lestrade interjected with alarm. "Are you suggesting some sort of espionage, Mr. Holmes?" "The evidence certainly points in that direction," Holmes replied, his tone measured. "Consider. A Foreign Office clerk disappears with sensitive documents. He resurfaces with a new identity as a club member whose mathematical talents make him exceptional at cards. He establishes rigid routines that make his behavior entirely predictable. And he receives payments from a Russian source through Swiss intermediaries." "Good Lord!" I exclaimed, the implications suddenly becoming clear. "You believe Prescott was selling information to the Russians?" "It appears so," Holmes nodded. "The question that remains is why his paymasters suddenly turned against him." Holmes returned to the notebook, studying its entries with renewed attention. "The final pages are most revealing," he observed. "The mathematical sequences change pattern approximately 3 weeks ago, coinciding with the arrival of that Swiss letter. And note this entry here, dated the day before his death. He displayed a page containing what appeared to be a series of fractions and symbols, followed by a hastily scrawled note. Position compromised, extraction required. I believe our Mr. Prescott had been discovered," Holmes continued. "Perhaps by British intelligence, perhaps by his Russian handlers. The letter from Switzerland was a warning, or perhaps a threat. His increased anxiety, noted by several witnesses, suggests he feared for his life." "But how does this connect to his death at the card table?" Lestrade demanded, his expression reflecting his struggle to follow Holmes's reasoning. "That, Inspector, is what we shall determine presently," Holmes replied. "I require a fresh deck of cards, unopened, if you please." Wilson promptly produced a sealed pack from a drawer. Holmes broke the seal and spread the cards upon the table, examining them carefully before selecting the ace of spades. "Now, observe closely," he instructed, producing the small vial I had noticed earlier. With meticulous care, he applied a drop of the colourless liquid to the edge of the card. Before our astonished eyes, the treated area turned a faint blue colour. "As I suspected," Holmes said with quiet triumph, "the cards have been treated with a substance along their edges, imperceptible to the naked eye, but quite detectable with the appropriate chemical test." "Poison?" I asked, professional interest now mingling with my amazement. "A particular preparation of aconite, I believe," Holmes confirmed. "Nearly undetectable unless one knows precisely what to look for. When combined with the natural oils of the hands during prolonged card play and the heat of the room, it would be gradually absorbed through the skin." "But surely such a method would endanger all the players," Lestrade objected. "Not if the poisoner knew exactly which cards Prescott would handle most frequently," Holmes countered. "His habit of shuffling exactly 27 times ensured that certain cards would repeatedly come into contact with his fingers, a mathematically precise method for a mathematically precise victim." Wilson had gone quite pale during this exchange. "Mr. Holmes," he stammered, "are you suggesting that someone deliberately poisoned Mr. Moran? I mean, Prescott?" "I'm not merely suggesting it, Mr. Wilson," Holmes replied, fixing the secretary with a penetrating gaze. "I am stating it as fact. The only remaining question is the identity of the poisoner." Holmes carefully gathered the cards and returned them to their box. "I shall need to examine the specific cards used on the night of Prescott's death," he announced. "I trust they were preserved." "Yes, sir," Wilson confirmed. "Following the inspector's instructions, they were sealed in an envelope and locked in my office." "Excellent. We shall examine them tomorrow. For now, gentlemen, I believe we have established the method of this most ingenious murder. The timing, the opportunity, and the means are all clear. Tomorrow we shall address the matter of motive and the identity of our poisoner." As we departed the Whitmore Club, the winter afternoon was already surrendering to the early darkness of the season. Lestrade, who had been uncharacteristically quiet following Holmes's demonstration, finally broke his silence. If what you say is true, Mr. Holmes, this is not merely murder, but an affair of state." "Precisely, Inspector," Holmes agreed solemnly, "which is why we must proceed with the utmost caution. There are forces at work here that extend far beyond the green baize tables of the Whitmore Club." That evening, as we sat before our fire at Baker Street, I found myself still struggling to fully comprehend the intricate web of deception and betrayal that Holmes had begun to unravel. "So Prescott was selling secrets to the Russians," I remarked, using his position at the whist table to somehow encode information. "Yes, Watson," Holmes confirmed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The tournament provided the perfect cover for his activities. Who would suspect that the ritualistic play of a card enthusiast concealed treason, yet the very precision that served him as a spy ultimately facilitated his murder? But who would have access to the cards before play, I wondered aloud, and the knowledge to employ such a method?" Holmes smiled thinly, though his eyes remained grave. "That, my dear Watson, is the question that shall occupy us tomorrow. I advise you to rest well tonight. The final hand of this particular game promises to be most dramatic indeed." Chapter 7. The Final Rubber. The following evening found us once again at the Whitmore Club. A light snow had begun to fall as our hansom deposited us at the entrance, the delicate flakes swirling in the glow of the gas lamps that flanked the doorway. Holmes had spent much of the day in his chemical corner at Baker Street, subjecting various playing cards to tests of his devising. His mood throughout had been one of intense concentration, broken only by occasional exclamations of satisfaction when a particular experiment yielded the expected result. At Holmes's request, Wilson had assembled all those present on the night of the tragedy. They gathered in the card-room, Colonel Havisham tugging uncomfortably at his collar, Sir George Blackett looking distinctly put out by the inconvenience, and Dr. Forsyth maintaining the professional detachment common to medical men accustomed to death. Several other members who had been observing the tournament stood in a small cluster near the window. Inspector Lestrade occupied a chair in the corner, his notebook at the ready. The club secretary himself appeared more haggard than ever, his movements betraying a nervous energy as he arranged chairs and ensured the fire was properly built up. I observed how his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his spectacles, a man clearly under considerable strain. Holmes stood before the fireplace, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the green baize tables. The flames illuminated his hawk-like profile as he surveyed the assembled company with that penetrating gaze I had witnessed so many times before. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room, "I believe I can now explain the circumstances surrounding Mr. Moran's death. Or perhaps I should say, Mr. Prescott's death." A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Colonel Havisham's face darkened, his military bearing becoming even more rigid. "What do you mean, Holmes?" he demanded sharply. "What's all this about Prescott?" "The man you knew as Sebastian Moran was, in fact, John Prescott, formerly a clerk in the Foreign Office's coding department," Holmes explained calmly. "In 1885 he disappeared along with a number of sensitive diplomatic documents. The trail led to Switzerland, but then went cold. He had, it seems, crafted himself a new identity with considerable skill." "Preposterous!" exclaimed Sir George Blackett, his florid face growing even redder. "I've known Moran for years. Distinguished family, impeccable reputation." "His reputation was indeed carefully cultivated," Holmes agreed, "but entirely fabricated. The documentation supporting his background would withstand casual scrutiny, but not a determined investigation. His supposed military service in Afghanistan, for instance, there is no record of any Sebastian Moran serving in that campaign." "But the death?" Dr. Forsyth interrupted, with professional concern. I examined him myself. Clear case of heart failure. Indeed it was, Doctor, Holmes acknowledged with a slight nod, but not, I think, entirely natural. He paused, allowing his gaze to move slowly around the room, noting each face, each reaction. The method was ingeniously chosen, making use of Mr. Prescott's own carefully established habits. The chair adjustments, the precise shuffling, the ritualistic use of snuff, all created opportunities for the murderer. But which one was actually employed? That, gentlemen, is what we shall now demonstrate. Holmes moved to the card table, the same at which Prescott had played his final game. From his pocket he produced a sealed envelope. These are the actual cards used on the night in question, he explained, carefully breaking the seal. Inspector Lestrade was good enough to secure them as evidence. He spread the cards on the table, their familiar red and black patterns gleaming in the lamplight. With methodical precision, Holmes selected several cards, the ace, king, queen, and jack of spades, and arranged them in a row. Mr. Prescott's habits were remarkably consistent, Holmes continued. He would shuffle exactly 27 times, no more, no less. This ensured that these particular cards, he indicated the row before him, would be handled extensively during each shuffle. From his waistcoat pocket, Holmes produced a small vial containing a clear liquid. With the inspector's permission, I shall now demonstrate how these cards differ from ordinary playing cards. Lestrade nodded his assent, leaning forward with intense curiosity. Holmes carefully applied a drop of the liquid to the edge of each card in turn. Before our astonished eyes, the treated areas turned a faint but unmistakable blue color. "Remarkable," Dr. Forsyth exclaimed, professional interest overcoming his earlier skepticism. "Some form of chemical reaction?" "Precisely, Doctor," Holmes confirmed. "These cards have been treated along their edges with a substance that, when subjected to this particular reagent, produces the color change you observe. The substance itself is a derivative of aconitine, a powerful poison that can be absorbed through the skin, particularly when combined with the natural oils of the hands and the warmth generated during prolonged card play." "Good God," murmured Colonel Havisham, his face paling beneath his weathered complexion. "You mean to say that as he shuffled—" "He was gradually administering the poison to himself," Holmes completed the thought. "A most ingenious method, would you not agree? The symptoms would appear gradually, mimicking natural heart failure. The victim's own meticulous habits became the instrument of his destruction. I observed the faces of those assembled as this revelation sank in. Shock, disbelief, and growing horror registered in their expressions. Wilson had retreated into the shadows at the edge of the room, his features difficult to discern in the flickering light. "But who could have done such a thing?" Sir George demanded, looking from face to face with growing alarm. "And why?" "The why is perhaps easier to establish than the who," Holmes replied. "As I mentioned, Prescott had absconded with sensitive diplomatic documents. We have evidence that he had been selling information to a foreign power for several years, using his membership in this club as cover for his activities." "The notebook," Lestrade interjected with sudden understanding. "Those weren't whist calculations at all, were they?" "They were indeed calculations," Holmes corrected, "but not merely for card games. They were cipher keys, carefully disguised as the notations of an enthusiastic player. The tournament setting provided perfect cover for what was, in essence, espionage." A heavy silence fell over the room as the full implications became clear. These men had unwittingly shared their club with a traitor to the crown. 3 weeks ago, Holmes continued, Prescott received a letter from Switzerland that clearly alarmed him. His behavior changed. He became anxious, watchful. I believe he had been betrayed, either by his foreign handlers or by an associate. "But the poison, the cards," Colonel Havisham persisted. Who could have had access to the club's card supply and the knowledge to employ such a method? That, Holmes said gravely, is the crucial question. The poisoner would need several qualifications: access to the cards before play, knowledge of Prescott's habits, expertise in chemical compounds, and a compelling motive. When we consider these requirements, the field of possible suspects narrows considerably. Holmes's gaze swept the room once more, lingering momentarily on certain faces before moving on. I could almost see the workings of his mind as he assessed each person present, weighing evidence, considering possibilities. "Gentlemen," he announced, gathering the poisoned cards and returning them carefully to their envelope, "I believe I know the identity of our poisoner, but before making an accusation of such gravity, there are certain facts I must verify. I ask for your patience until tomorrow evening, when I shall present my conclusions in full." A buzz of conversation erupted as Holmes concluded his demonstration. The members clustered in small groups, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to outright fear. Who among them might be a killer? The atmosphere of the once comfortable club had been irrevocably altered. As we prepared to depart, Lestrade drew Holmes aside. "You already know who did it, don't you?" he asked in a low voice. "I have a very good idea," Holmes admitted quietly. "But in a case with such significant implications, one must be absolutely certain before proceeding." Outside, the snow had intensified, blanketing the streets in white silence. Holmes and I walked some distance before finding a vacant hansom. His expression remained thoughtful, his eyes distant, as we made our way back to Baker Street. "You were magnificent, Holmes," I remarked, breaking the silence. "The demonstration with the cards was most effective." "A simple chemical test," he replied modestly. "The real ingenuity lay in the method of murder, using the victim's own habits against him. There is a certain elegance to it that one must acknowledge despite its deadly purpose." "Will you truly wait until tomorrow to reveal the murderer?" I asked as our cab turned on to Baker Street. Holmes's lips curved in a slight smile. "There is one final piece of evidence I require, Watson. A telegram I expect to receive by morning. Once that arrives, the last card will have been played in this most unusual game." As I glanced at my friend's profile, illuminated briefly by a passing street lamp, I saw in his expression that peculiar combination of intellectual satisfaction and moral gravity that marked the conclusion of his most significant cases. Whatever revelations awaited us the following evening at the Whitmore Club, I knew they would prove to be both surprising and profound. Chapter 8. The Final Hand. The telegram Holmes had been expecting arrived with the morning post. He read it with evident satisfaction, then passed it to me without comment. It contained only a few cryptic lines from Mycroft Holmes, confirming certain details regarding Foreign Office operations that would mean little to an ordinary reader, but which clearly held significant meaning for my friend. "The final piece, Watson," Holmes remarked, folding the telegram carefully and placing it in his pocketbook. "The game is now complete." That evening, a bitter wind swept down Baker Street as we prepared to return to the Whitmore Club for the denouement of the curious affair. Holmes was unusually silent as he donned his overcoat, his lean face set in lines of concentration. Only once, as we descended the 17 steps to the street, did he offer any insight into his thoughts. "There are cases, Watson, where justice and the law may not entirely coincide," he observed quietly. "This, I believe, may prove to be one such instance." The Whitmore Club was brilliantly lit against the winter darkness, its windows gleaming like topaz in the night. We found the same company assembled in the card room as the previous evening, with the addition of Mr. Morton from the Foreign Office, who sat somewhat apart from the others, his expression guarded. Inspector Lestrade had positioned himself near the door, as if prepared to prevent any hasty departures. As we entered, I noted how the atmosphere had changed from the previous evening. Gone was the initial skepticism. In its place hung a palpable tension. These men now knew that one among them had committed a calculated murder, and the uncertainty had clearly taken its toll. Colonel Havisham's military bearing seemed more forced than natural. Sir George Blackett's usual ruddy complexion had acquired a greyish undertone, and Dr. Forsyth's professional detachment had hardened into something approaching wariness. Wilson stood near the fireplace, his thin frame silhouetted against the flames. Though he maintained his customary precise demeanour, I observed a certain rigidity in his posture that betrayed inner tension. Holmes took his position before the assembled company, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat to begin. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere, "I believe I can now explain the circumstances surrounding Mr. Prescott's death in full detail. The key, as in so many cases, lies not merely in what occurred, but in why it occurred." He paced slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back in that professorial manner he often adopted when explaining his conclusions. The man known to you as Sebastian Moran was, as I explained yesterday, actually John Prescott, formerly employed in the Foreign Office Coding Department. In 1885, he disappeared along with sensitive diplomatic documents. For 3 years, British intelligence sought him without success. Meanwhile, Prescott established himself as Sebastian Moran, creating an elaborate background that would withstand casual scrutiny. His choice of the Whitmore Club as his base was no accident. The mathematical nature of whist suited his analytical mind, and the regular tournaments provided perfect cover for his true activities. Holmes paused, glancing at Morton, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Those activities, gentlemen, constituted high treason. Prescott was selling state secrets to a foreign power, specifically to Russia. His notebook, which appeared to contain mere whist calculations, actually recorded cipher keys used to encode and decode information. The ritualistic aspects of tournament play, the precise timing, the methodical procedures, allowed him to exchange information without arousing suspicion. 3 weeks ago, Prescott received a letter from Switzerland that caused him considerable distress. We now know this letter came from a former associate who was attempting to blackmail him. This development alarmed not only Prescott, but also those who had been monitoring his activities." Holmes turned toward the fireplace, gazing momentarily into the flames before continuing. "The key," he said, turning back to face the room, "lies in the cards themselves." Prescott's habit of shuffling exactly 27 times was not mere superstition. It was necessary to ensure consistent handling of certain cards. This predictable behavior created the opportunity for his elimination through a most ingenious method. The poison on the card's edges was a sophisticated preparation of aconite, applied only to specific cards that Prescott would handle repeatedly during his shuffling routine. When combined with the perspiration of prolonged play, it would be gradually absorbed through the skin. The effects would appear incremental, mimicking natural heart failure. But who, Holmes continued, his gaze sweeping the room, had both the opportunity to prepare the cards and the motive to eliminate Prescott? The position of club secretary would provide such access, would it not, Mr. Wilson? Or should I say, Agent Wilson of the Foreign Office? All eyes turned to Wilson, who remained remarkably composed despite the accusation. He adjusted his spectacles calmly, meeting Holmes's gaze without flinching. "The timing of Prescott's death was crucial," Holmes went on. "The tournament provided the perfect opportunity, a public setting, multiple witnesses, and a seemingly natural explanation. The empty snuff box was a final touch of misdirection, suggesting he might have ingested something harmful." "You have proof of this?" Lestrade asked, from his position by the door, his notebook poised. The cards from that night's game showed clear traces of the poison, virtually undetectable unless one knows precisely what to look for. The particular preparation used is known only to certain government agencies employed in situations where conventional methods are impractical. Wilson's shoulders sagged slightly, though his expression remained composed. "It was a matter of national security," he said quietly, breaking his silence at last. Prescott's actions had already cost the lives of 3 British agents in St. Petersburg. The blackmail attempt meant he was likely to sell additional secrets to cover the payment. We could not risk further damage. "The law, Mr. Wilson, must still take its course," Holmes replied gravely. "Though I doubt the full story will ever become public. Some games, after all, are best left unfinished." Morton rose from his chair, his authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. "I believe, Inspector," he said to Lestrade, "that this matter falls under the Official Secrets Act. My department will take responsibility for Mr. Wilson from here." Lestrade looked momentarily conflicted, then slowly closed his notebook. "Very well, Mr. Morton. I shall report to the Commissioner that the death has been satisfactorily explained as natural causes." The other club members watched this exchange in stunned silence, comprehension gradually dawning on their faces. They had been unwitting participants in a drama of international intrigue played out amidst the genteel surroundings of their exclusive establishment. As we walked home through the snowy streets later that night, I remarked on the ingenuity of the murder method. "Yes," Holmes agreed, thoughtfully tapping his cane against the iron railings as we passed. "It was cleverly conceived. The killer used Prescott's own methodical nature against him. His precise habits with the cards ensured a consistent, gradual dose of the poison. The tournament setting provided the perfect cover for the final, fatal absorption. A case, Watson, where the victim's own winning strategy proved to be his undoing." "But how did you first suspect the cards?" I asked, still marveling at the intricate chain of reasoning that had led to the solution. "The timing, Watson, always the timing. Why did Prescott break his pattern that final night, adjusting his chair at the wrong moment? Because the symptoms were beginning to affect him. The rest was simply a matter of following the evidence to its logical conclusion." He smiled grimly. Though I must admit the empty snuff box was a particularly elegant touch of misdirection. "A remarkable case," I observed, "though perhaps not one I can share with my readers." "Indeed not, my dear fellow. Some games must remain unchronicled, much like the great game of international intrigue that led to our card player's demise." And with that cryptic remark, Holmes lapsed into silence, leaving me to ponder the complex web of deception that had ended in death at the Whitmore Club's card table. It was a case that revealed, perhaps more than any other I had chronicled, how the shadow world of espionage and counter-espionage operated beneath the veneer of Victorian propriety. Though justice had been served in its way, I could not help but reflect on the moral ambiguity that surrounded the affair. A skilled traitor eliminated through an equally skilled act of state-sanctioned murder. As Baker Street came into view, the gas lamps casting their mellow glow through the falling snow, I glanced at my companion's profile and wondered what other secrets lay locked within that remarkable mind, secrets that, like the true story of the Whitmore Club tragedy, might never be revealed to the world. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more literary adventures. Don't forget to share that positive moment from your life and where you're tuning in from in the comments. I'm genuinely looking forward to reading them and featuring some in our next video. This is Alfie from Cafe Stories, wishing you keen observation in your daily life. Thank you and God bless you wherever you're listening from.